moment. Okay, I had to restart the recording there. Okay, Cheryl, welcome. If you could take just a couple minutes to introduce yourself, we're glad you're here.
Hi, I'll take a brief moment. Cheryl Jackson Williams here. I am the Family and Community Engagement Coordinator with the within the Renton Innovation Zone. That Renton Innovation Zone represents the families and community of Skyway West Hill. That's all of Skyway West Hill. So that covers the community of Lake Ridge, Bryn Mawr, and Campbell Hill. Also added in that is the community of the Highlands area, which is in the Sunset community of Renton, the city of Renton. So excited to be here and excited to be able to talk later.
Great. We're so happy you're here. I'm going to give an opportunity. This is an on deck for all of you. I'm going to give the panel an opportunity to sort of respond to the report at large, but I'm going to kick it back to Julie first to talk through the recommendations. And so I'm going to put the recommendations up. Julie, if you could just talk us through some of those sort of the big plays that the report calls for, and then panelists at large, all of you, you're on deck, and we'll have an opportunity for one or two of you to respond at that point. And then those of you who are participants, I guess you're constantly on deck. Please do feel free to add any questions you have as we go. I think we'll have a moment before we move on to the next piece to address some questions as well. So, all right, Julie, thank you.
Sure. I want to first say that these recommendations came from the research, but they were also vetted by a community advisory board. So this was a community-informed research approach. So this advisory board met monthly, and they were able to look at the data, kind of help us digest the data, and really help us understand, what were going to be the most powerful systemic investments that could address some of the findings and the inequities that we've been talking about. So I'll just, I won't focus on all of them. I want to just mention the first one in terms of empowering schools to be a hub for physical activity. That goes with the finding that that's really what families wanted. But I want to just clarify that that's not about saddling schools with more responsibility, because if they could be a hub, they probably would be, right? It's just more that schools need community support and investment to be able to serve as the space where families and kids can be active all day long, all weekend long, all summer long. And right now we have schools and those spaces, but they're not always accessible and available. And so it's more about like, what kind of policies and investments can we make to support schools to be that hub for kids? And that really goes with kind of this public health campaign. It's a public health campaign, and the campaign is needed because right now those exact investments and policies from philanthropy and municipalities that we need to invest in physical activity just aren't there. It's just not a youth development priority right now. And so this campaign, the idea of this campaign is, how can we tell the story about how gaps in access to play and movement early in life become really wide health and educational inequities later on? And if we leave out physical activity, movement, and play, we're missing an opportunity, a vital opportunity to provide health supportive engagement for kids in all areas, and to bolster cognition, to bolster mental health, to provide opportunities to heal from trauma. And so the campaign is very much about telling the story about why physical activity needs to be a critical youth development priority. And that's, I guess, why it's good to be here at BSK, because that's what BSK is about, is trying to understand what those investments could be to have healthier youth and communities in the long run. So I'll just hit on those two.
Great. We are shortly going to transition into how some of these recommendations play out with some of the other panelists. I'm really excited to dig into that. But before we do that, I'll just open it up to any panelists who want to respond on the report, specifically how the report's impacted your work, or how the findings or recommendations have shaped what you do, without too much stepping on the sort of what we're going to dig into later. So just open it up for any comments on the report specifically to the panelists.
Yeah, maybe I'll chime in, and maybe I'll
Great, thanks.
turn to Sarah also to provide a little bit more context. And Sarah kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I think that for, King County Parks and Recreation is a pretty big system. We have over 200 parks, 175 miles of regional trail system, to over 200 miles of backcountry trails. And with that just comes all sorts of different amenities, including fields and playgrounds and trails and all that comes along with this. So it's a significantly big system, primarily in our unincorporated areas and spaces. And the part around defining need, and when you take the approach of clearly defining the need, then that next step of, okay, what do you do about it, and being able to sort of get to that question, I think it just made the report just sort of made that sort of crystal clear on that. And it really sort of, in addition to the research approach to the report, I think for us, it seemed to have brought that clarity around mobilizing around what do we do about that need and how do we approach that, not only within the levers that we have as a department, but then how do we work in partnership to not only be supportive, but to play those multiple roles of convener and whatever role that we can play in the work. But Sarah might have some more context to add to this one.
Yeah, what was really helpful about the analysis and the research was that we were able to hear from youth directly through the youth surveys, through their families, to understand their perspective in terms of accessing various programs, both school-based and community-based. And then also hear from program providers as well in terms of what systemic barriers do they face as an organization trying to get access to facilities or trying to get support for various elements of their programming. And I would say it was just very enlightening and insightful because, we think of, with our grant program, what can we fund that would help, programs to have a greater impact. And for example, we realized early on, okay, we need to allow funding for transportation costs. And yet we also found within a year or two that just providing funding still didn't, solve all the problems of circulating around transportation. And so that helped, this report helped dive in a little bit more about the broader systemic issue around transportation access, that we need to be thinking about beyond just purely funding a program at the program level. So that's been just helpful for us to look at what other levers within the county we can push on, policy-wise and investment-wise, to be able to solve some of these larger barriers that are, pertinent to us as parks and as a county, as well as school districts, and how we can all much better work together to improve access.
Great.
I think the only thing I'd throw in there and add really
Go ahead.
quick at the macro level is, I don't think anybody who's on the outside reading this report is comfortable with a D grade. Like the aspect that we live, where we live, with the amount of resources that we have here, certainly in and amongst the professional sports teams that I get to collaborate with that have been a part of this and are sitting together trying to figure out how we play a role. Like the thing that keeps us going is like, we all want to win, and a D's not good enough. And I think putting that on a piece of paper and seeing exactly where we stack up is really valuable, as much as, because it gets people to listen to that narrative that Julie's talking about. Like when we get to this common understanding that, oh, like kids need physical activity. Amazing. They perform better in school. They have more social emotional equity and capital to spend to be better leaders and more thoughtful, productive members. Oh, wow. But you get them to the table because, like, I know my owner is like a D. I'm like, yeah, we got a D. Like, that's not okay. So that there's a lot of power in this report just from that sort of galvanizing us to action, because we're not there yet.
Use that competitive spirit to our maximum advantage. Perfect. Great. So we're gonna take a short interactive stand break. So we walk our talk. When we come back, Cheryl, we'll start with you, just hearing a little bit about how you action some of these things in Renton, and then you'll be after Cheryl after the break. So for the next 5 minutes, you have all of you here, participants as well. Two things. first, stand up, move around for a minute, and then no, we're not going to do aerobics. I'm just asking you to stand and stretch this time. And then we're going to have you respond to a short prompt. I'm going to pull up the responses here. It'll be a word cloud so we can kind of see as they come in. So go ahead and stand up, stretch, and when you come back, go ahead and put that word or however many words you want into that response. You can see how to access that. You can either access it via your browser or you can text. And then we will come back in about 5 minutes and we'll roll to Cheryl. All right. So I will see you then. Everybody stand up and move. All right, I'm going to give us about a 1 minute warning here, and we'll just watch these wonderful words come in and be. I'm feeling some of that actually after a nice walk. I walked up and down my stairs. I do feel refreshed. Definitely feel more present and clear-headed. It's working. Accomplished. That's great. I love how centered is the biggest and it's centered. I totally planned that. All right, about 30 more seconds and then we'll pick back up. We got a chat response alive, which I love. Great. Thanks, everybody. This was excellent. I think it's I'm feeling these words, a lot of these words in my body, which sort of makes the case, both in a feeling way for what we're talking about. So we're having sort of a full sensory learning experience here. So I appreciate everybody for doing that. I'm gonna take a second and move back to our slide, and then Cheryl, you'll be up. Just give me 1 second here. Great. Great. Cheryl, are you back? I want to make sure we're not
Yes,
still
I'm here.
outside running around the block. Okay, cool.
No.
Great. So, Cheryl, the community partnership model that you're leading at Renton with the school district really illustrates this top recommendation, which is empowering schools. So, can you talk just a little bit more about that and how you've coordinated that effort?
Yes, definitely. But I first want to see the responsibility to that and the strengths of that partnership in the community, because it was the community that breathed life into that, in regards to engaging with the school district and other community-based organizations and being able to articulate their needs and what they were looking for. And one of the things that was noted most was being in an unincorporated area of Skyway. There was not a community center or a space that could actually support families or our babies within the community be able to engage in a way where they're not only participating in physical activity, but being able to just expand upon their knowledge of sports and engagement in arts and what have you. And so at that point, the school district was challenged to figure out a way to open its doors while integrating community into the spaces to be able to support our student body and our community at large in regards to doing that piece. With that, the first thing that was really a challenge for the school district is that regardless of whether something is offered to the community free, there are still associated costs that come with it, from paying for janitorial services, paying for toilet paper, all the things that we kind of take for granted that aren't counted in the bottom line of when we're talking about programming. When you're actually a site that's hosting the space, you need to consider and be able to figure out a way to cover so that it can be delivered. And I think that for us, it was initially being able to secure funding to address those particular costs. And after that, really being able, again, to listen to the community and secure engagement with community-based organizations that already had credibility in the community, were already doing a lot of this work, and did not have the ability to integrate into the schools to offer it. And so with that in mind, we secured partnerships for programming to be offered through, 5 core elements. Those elements were, scientific inquiry, environmental stewardship, just health and wellness, work development, employment development in regards to creating internships so that our youth would be able to see how they can integrate their love of sports into work without it necessarily being them being an athlete, and them being inside of the world of sports, which I think at a lot of levels our youth don't get that accessibility and that understanding. And the last being arts, arts and culture. So for us, it was, again, securing those in the community that kind of fell within those particular areas, and then also hearing from the community and their response regarding what they would like to see. So for us as a school district, we didn't necessarily deliver what we thought they wanted. We asked them specifically, if you could have a magic wand and pick the kind of programs you would like to see here, what would they look like? And as they told that story and they spun that narrative for us, it was our role as a school district to go out and secure the partnerships with the folks that actually did those types of things. One of the other pieces that we did is understanding that everyone has, they may be coming to the table based on their experiences, their expertise, with a certain level of understanding in regards to youth program quality. We felt like we could also leverage our acumen as a school district and as an institution to make sure that they had baseline things, that, all of their staff was certified in, first aid CPR. When we talk about racial equity and inclusion, that everyone's coming in with the same baseline knowledge of what that is. When we're talking about social emotional learning and where our kids are and what we're leveraging within the RIS, making sure that our providers understood that so that they can integrate that into their system of engagement with our babies. With the other caveat being too, when you talk about youth program quality initiative and some of the elements that they say really make a strong program, a lot of our providers are doing that on their own without even knowing that there's this body of work out there that not only strengthens what you can do as far as a provider, it actually can empower you to be able to tell your story in a language that maybe funders understand when you talk about YPQI. So for us as the school district, those are the things that we do to build capacity for our providers, where we're having quarterly meetings, they're meeting with staff, they're talking about how to integrate into the school, where it's not them coming in and providing a service and they're just a provider. They're part of the school community because that's important. We are talking about, data sharing in the sense of the kids that are serving and how their grades look and how they're doing during the day, being able to have those type of communications so that they can see the real impact of their work, because they're not here in the school district to provide, this engagement and this service for money. They're passionate about youth. They're passionate about serving, and they want to know that they are really supporting the overall being of our babies. And so us being able to set up platforms that already understand that and create the communication around it. This is just our second year at this. And of course, there's always growth. But I think starting and being grounded and being community driven has definitely been able to empower me in my role to challenge some institutional strings that might be there if it wasn't community driven. I think also just this report was able to provide voice and provide a language that allowed us not to speak from passion and speak from the community voice, but speak from science in a way, to speak from statistics, to speak from education. So this particular report that you guys wrote, and I know that you guys talked about this earlier, but I wanted to discuss it here, has allowed us to go back to the table and continue to push the boundaries to say, we know that the school district is doing something very different. And when you guys talk to other school districts, you're getting a response like, yeah, we're not doing that. But do you see that this is the number one recommendation and that we are actually doing something that not just this community is asking for, but all communities are asking for? And how can we continue in that fight? How can we be trendsetters? And what can we do to remove barriers so that we can integrate our community even more? So I think that, like I said, this is just the first year, but we're going to continue to do this because unincorporated King County does not have a community center anywhere within Skyway, and the schools are looked at as that safe space. And until we have an alternate space that functions in that way, that's holistically welcoming and engaging with the community, we will continue to hold that plaque.
Great. Yeah, I think, wow, so much, so much amazing sort of best practices for all of us to hear. I mean, I think particularly when we all like to talk about cross-sector partnerships, and then when we know how hard it can be to actually, get some of those big institutions on board. And you talk about it like, this is the thing we just did, but we know that took a lot, and it's taking a lot, and it's just an amazing example. So thanks. Maya, I know the Sounders and the Ray Foundation have been really focused in investing and making soccer more accessible in all our communities. Can you talk a little bit about your approach?
Sure.
And then Warren, you're on deck.
Sure. It's actually perfect segue, Cheryl. It's like you set me up to leave on the sort of institutional aspects of this, because I think the things we know to be true are that soccer is one of the most highly participated and organized sports in all of Washington State, let alone King County. That's girls and boys. It is absolutely a pay-to-play model, and even at the lowest ends, there is a cost barrier to entry. You also need facilities to play, and so the facilities that get built are often really awesome, amazing turf fields that are always used, because guess what? We need more of them, but they're full size. And so when you sort of start talking about what are those other barriers to participation outside of just the cost of participating in the sport, you have to be on a historic roll in some places to even be eligible to rent a field. And that's presuming that that you have insurance for your activity. And that's presuming you're willing to fill out a background check form. And if you are someone coming from a community of color, maybe from a background or a part of the world, or in an immigration status where you do not want to take those steps, even though you're a wonderfully amazing soccer coach, you're not going to get a field for your team. And being on the other side of it and being someone who has that insurance and has the responsibility to protect kids, I can't tell you how many times I had to kick off kids who were just playing pickup soccer because we rented the field and our insurance would have been not covered an injury from an errant ball coming over and hitting my 8-year-olds, because the 17, 18, and 19-year-old guys over there were playing adjacent to us, and I would have let it happen. So you get this weird world where the pay-to-play model is neither the threat or neither is it a detriment to kids playing soccer, but it doesn't help it natively. And part of it is a function of the model, and part of it is a function of spaces. And so one of the things that we looked at a long time ago was, could we build smaller places to play that are therefore inherently unrentable for organized activities, because they wouldn't fall definitionally on any of the interlocal agreements for sports fields. And certainly, like, look, parks departments are stuck with the funding mechanisms they have. They have to rent fields to pay for maintenance and people to maintain the fields and facilities, and we want them maintained, because if they aren't maintained, they're not usable by anyone. So rather than that, how do we fit into this model? So we started funding mini pitches and small fields. I can tell you that the concept of free play in traditional, organized, institutional parks departments and school districts is new and novel. And to go to the Seattle Parks Department with our first field at Yesler Terrace and say, we're going to build this thing, we're going to promise to pay for its first round of asset management, but we want it open for free play 365 days of the year, was a novel thing to get them to understand. And it took a lot of conversations and honestly really great leadership from Christopher Wells and Michael Shiosaki at the time at Seattle Parks to sort of get their arms around a pilot for something like this. And now it's becoming more the norm, this idea that you could have places or periods of time for assets that are dedicated for free play. But I'm talking about not ancient history here. This was like 2013, 2014, 2015, where these conversations were starting. And they were really hard to get people to understand how important it was. The other thing, when we sort of look at, the institutions and the systems, it's that concept of understanding that as a partner coming to the table in a funding place, I can't go to Sarah and Warren and say, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it, and here you go, in a very paternalistic way, because it's what Sounders FC wants. I've got to sit at the table. We have to sit at the table and listen. And it's exactly what Cheryl talked about, not just to the landowner, but the people around the community. And one of the things we did with Yesler Terrace, it's our first small field, which is actually a small turf field as opposed to a futsal court, is spent about 1.5 years on the ground in the community with the other community-based organizations that were going in there. And we talked a lot to the residents in the adjacent Seattle Housing Authority development about how they wanted to use the field. And what we quickly learned was that if we went in and made this small field look like a soccer field, like put a halfway line and a center circle on it, it would be inaccessible to residents who didn't want to use it for that purpose. We made it rectangular. We put goals on the end. It's very obviously a soccer field. That's all it has to be to inform players who want to use it as a soccer field to be a soccer field. But if we didn't put anything else on it and it was just green space, now if you go up there on the weekends, you have the senior Tai Chi club using it in the mornings because of where it's situated. You have folks throwing a Frisbee or using it as a picnic space. It doesn't feel so inaccessible or threatening as a soccer field, but you also go up there and it's used as a soccer field all of the time. I think that's something we learned in this process very early on, was that that key play in the state of play, like ask the question as a program provider or in this case, a facility provider. It doesn't seem that hard, but it is such an important piece of this that if I could take away and say, replicate this in every part of our community, it's that. Because we're going to get different answers. We got a different answer in Yesler. And one of the questions actually that came was, we don't want you to put a fence up around it because it's an eyesore, but how are you going to keep the balls on the field with Washington Street right there? And how is that not a safety issue for the kids? Well, soccer's got an answer for that. You make the goals smaller. If you make the goals smaller, kids don't shoot from as far away. They're less likely, the ball's less likely to be in the air and it's less likely to go into the street. And so having that conversation, we have a field now that serves the entirety of the community, not just the soccer players. It manages the public safety expectations for the kids in that community, and now it can be used 365 days of the year in all the ways the community needs it to function and live. But for our purposes, of course, it's a soccer field and making sure that it's accessible that way. The other piece of this for us, besides spaces, is like, we fundamentally believe that all you need to play the game is a ball. Like, we can't build. I believe in a day, and we Ray Foundation Board believes in a day where every single one of the maybe now 2 million, I think the last census had 1.5 million kids, like school-age kids in the state of Washington, lives within one accessible, safe, walkable mile of a safe place to play soccer, and every kid has a soccer ball to do so. But that last piece of the soccer ball piece is really something we can do. And so it's not just about building these safe places to play, or these mini pitches, and putting them in places that allow for that safe place within one walkable mile, but it's about giving kids the other tools for free play. You know, that's the secret sauce. And so it's multidimensional.
Great. Thanks, Maya. I see Julie just reminded folks that we will take questions. We do have some time buffer on each end of these segments to take questions. That does not mean you have to wait until I ask again. So please just type them in the chat. We'll pause and get to questions as we go. So if you have questions, even just for a specific panelist, to learn more about Cheryl or what Maya's talking about, or any of us, please don't hesitate to write them in, because we'll have a moment to respond. Okay. Warren, I promised you were on deck. I know King County Parks is prioritizing the coalition. You're supporting financially, and you're sort of reflecting on your policies and practices. And I'd love to hear, for roughly 3 minutes or so, if you could share a little bit more about how King County Parks is addressing inequities.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm just so encouraged, in many ways about this conversation, knowing that there's the passion behind it. And I think that that's what's great in working within a coalition and working within partnership is that, in addition to sort of hold each other accountable, we get to do it together, and we're all leaning into it together in the hopes to make it easier for each other. And knowing that, at least for us at King County Parks, one of the roles that we play is that, we can directly impact what access looks like, at least within the amenities that we have, and in thinking about, that one of the things that Maya, you talked about, what I think sometimes is a policy push up against, I think, good intention around the funding of park systems, and how that sort of at times really rubs up against this access piece, right? Because, in many ways, many park agencies, King County Parks included, have need to generate some revenue, right, to further our mission work. While at the same time, we have the responsibility to be intentional when it comes to communities who don't have access. And so what do we do about that? And I think that that's the reflection point that we're at King County Parks. What does access look like, and how does historical use of our fields really create barriers to communities that don't have currently access? And what does that look like? What does costs look like and fee structures look like for us? And so, you know, I really envision us being able to tackle these issues through a couple of different initiatives, and that is taking a look at our fee policy. How can we integrate an equitable criteria that's really based on what we're talking about today, and come up with a fee structure that allows us to provide access for those communities that have the need, but don't necessarily have the ability to pay for access to that need. So that's really a conversation for us as an agency to tackle that issue. And of course, working with the community to figure out what that looks like, and working through the coalition gives us that chance to really inform what we do there. And then just taking a look at sort of the historical use and you know, taking a look at how that even looks like. We all have been impacted by COVID, and it's been such unique times as a community that we're all experiencing. We've had to make really difficult decisions as a community. For us at King County Parks, one of the really toughest decisions that I think we've made was closing our park system through this experience. And it was so disheartening, quite honestly, making that call. We're all in this work for a reason, to be able to, for our own whys. For me, we've talk about my kiddos, and talk about thinking about access for youth, and in particular closing our playgrounds was just so difficult to think about. But I think that on the other side of it, and as we were thinking about the idea of reopening, the idea of access to fields and how we approach that came up, and the coalition kind of developed a tool, an equity tool.
Great segue. We're going to see that next.
Yeah, so, we had a chance to apply, we had a chance to sort of use that tool as we're thinking about, quite honestly, a blank slate to reopening. And what does reopening in terms of field access look like for King County Parks? And so we put the tool to use, and we made some decisions in our reopening to say, we're going to prioritize those folks who are providing access to communities of color, low-income communities, and give them that first access to fields and to practice. We're currently in this phase 2, and so those programs are really using those field accesses, for practicing. And we were able to work with the coalition to inform, those key partners that, hey, come to us. This is what it looks like. This is how we're going to approach that. But that was really a result of really the report really defining this need for us and telling us, hey, this is what you could do about it. This is how you can approach it differently. The other piece I just sort of want to talk to very quickly is the recommendation around transportation solutions. And, we can, one of the things that we really aspire to do is tackle the proximity issue. And we have really good data that really informs where there's the need when it comes to proximity to park, trail, and natural area open space. And we're targeting investments to try to close those gaps. The other interesting part that has been modeled is okay, so how can I get out to nature? How do we provide access to nature? And in particular, out of South County, and Trailhead Direct is a program that was really created with that in mind, to provide access for communities to nature and open space that don't have that kind of access. And I could see that as a model when we think about access to fields. And it's something that we want to co-create with the community and with the coalition to think about, is there something that we can use there to better close that gap when it comes to access? And so it's certainly an issue that we want to dig into and think about how we can provide really good solution there.
Great. Yeah. Oh, Warren, you segged us perfectly. We're going to turn the corner here into talking about the new context that we're in right now. And just as a heads up, Bookie, you're coming up, and then Cheryl, you're on deck here. But before we do that, I want to again just make sure everybody knows participants use the chat for questions. We'd love to hear about what you're wondering about and what you would like to hear more about. And so please, your guidance there and your questions, we'd love to respond to. So that's, I'm going to continue to ask that y'all do that so that we can address exactly what's relevant to those of us who are in the room. So Warren set this up perfectly. The coalition, when COVID hit, we were in the midst of building our infrastructure and deciding what this coalition even was going to look like. And we've, like many of you, probably have continued to pivot on a weekly, it feels like daily sometimes, basis as new realities come our way from COVID. But one of the things we were able to do as a coalition, and this really was a team effort, was create the tool that you see on the slide now. One of the things that we started to see when folks and big entities started to organize around reopening recommendations is that there really wasn't anything that had an equity lens that took some of these phases, took some of these recommendations and applied equity considerations to them. And so we got together, this was a true coalition effort. We got together and sort of thought through what kind of resource could we create for folks that would just help. It may not provide many answers, but perhaps provide some questions that folks may not be asking. When they're reading through, Washington State guidance or US OC guidance or CDC guidance or other, big pieces of sort of reopening recommendations that were coming down the line that we know that we were and many people really, really relied on. So we just wanted to, we overlaid some guidance in the phases with some questions on equitable reopening. And so I want to, Bookie and Cheryl, I want to talk a little bit just about sort of how COVID's changed what you do. So we're going to start there. And then I also will sort of move to the whole panel and talk just a little bit about reopening with an equity lens. We can, talk a little bit more about this tool if that's helpful. But we're going to spend the last 15 minutes or so talking about that. And we will answer any participants' questions that come down the line as we go. Bookie, why don't we start with you? And if you could just talk for 2 minutes or so, just about how COVID has impacted the work that Baseball Beyond Borders has done and how you responded. And then Cheryl, you're on deck with the same question.
Yeah, of course, as we know, the financial impact, it goes across the board, right? And we're not just a lone wolf in that category. But it did allow us to reimagine our approach. It allowed us to identify the social capital that existed within our organization and further invest in the families in which we work with. I think it also gave us this ability to revisit how we have been conditioned so much with weaponizing our data to the advantage of wanting to access certain things simply for the sake of who we may serve, right? Or the quantity of folks we serve, and not necessarily the quality in which we offer as a program or service provider, and the impact, right? How better off will these individuals be? So it gave us this moment to look at the gaps in our services. And I think even as we started to think about our return to play, we couldn't just think about how we get kids onto the field, right? Or how we get kids into the courts or on courts. We had to think about how do we get parents to engage in this process and this opportunity. And I think we often forget that, right? We think as if they're not the forever coach of these individuals, or they're not the ones that will provide the necessary transportation means to get these children to and from our programs and services. We have to also look at the locations, right? The locales in which we actually were looking to offer this so that we can reduce some of the impact that transportation will require. But it ultimately just gave us this ability to think differently and really utilize that tool to really get into a place where we have to begin to look internally, right, at what we're offering and how we shift the focus on the individual youth and turn that into the dynamic of the family. And I think that was probably the most important thing we offer that brought greater visibility to our work and continues to build on the narrative that we aren't looking to just solely exploit and marginalize these communities. We actually want to elevate the promise to increase the inclusion and diversity that exist and provide them with equitable access to play overall. So I'm just grateful that we have a newfound approach to really address some of those gaps that existed that we never had the time to look at in the past.
I think certainly it's uh, one great way to look at it is the opportunity, right? And but also knowing that this opportunity comes at in the face of really new challenges that change day to day. So thanks. Cheryl, you want to talk just a little bit about, again, maybe 2 minutes or so, just about how the pandemic has impacted your work?
Yeah, definitely the pandemic has impacted my work specifically with this project and almost turning it on its head in the sense that our school buildings are now closed. Due to COVID, they were closed somewhat after the direction of Governor Inslee. So that left us with great opportunity to try to really engage community even more and say, okay, now that we don't have this particular resource, how can we bring this to a living room near you? And that allowed us to actually reimagine some of our different offerings. And while we could not, with all our offerings, be able to figure out a way to come into the living rooms, there were several different offerings that we had where we were actually able to create Zoom spaces for our babies to engage and continue to participate, as well as a YouTube channel where the schools have their specific YouTube channel where babies from the school or even their friends, because it's not something that we actually police where we're saying, you're not from the Renton School District, you can't access it. We want every baby that needs to have access to be able to have access. So, but it was something where there were also kind of like pre-taped sessions where our students and families could be able to, learn a new dance through, a new dance routine through a session, be able to learn soccer drills and skills or basketball drills and skills, be able to appreciate tap, the roots of tap, but also be able to practice some various dance forms within tap. So I think at this point, we're continuing to explore and expanding upon that and seeing how those things work. We're also surveying and talking with our families to see how did that work. Again, it's always great on our institutional end to say, hey, bringing it to their front room and meeting them where they're at. But we need to be cognizant that there may be only one TV. So are we putting more pressure on parents in the sense that they would just like to, have some downtime and be able to watch a little TV, and they can't because their kiddos want to do a ballet lesson right in the middle of them watching their favorite show. So being able to look at the use of our babies' Chromebooks and some other, if we were to implement a particular Zoom session, is it just as lively and fun on the Chromebook or the tablet or the iPad as it would be if they watch it on their 60-inch TV or the 20-inch or the 30-inch. So again, we're in exploration, and we're definitely allowing our feedback loops from the community and from our babies that are using this process to kind of inform us. So we're steadily evolving, but we're doing that and balancing two things. Like we're still trying to bring as much engagement and physical activity as possible while trying to meet basic needs. So a lot of my work right now falls into attempting to meet basic needs of food insecurity, because unfortunately with unincorporated King County, food insecurity in Skyway is real. So making sure that we're meeting those needs, making sure that we're supporting with rent subsidy and connecting them to resources. So we are having a dual role in the sense of serving the babies to make sure they're still having some type of extension, some type of social engagement, while continuing to evolve, while also meeting the basic needs, because we understand that just as resources for play were scarce in Skyway, resources for basic needs are scarce in Skyway. So we also need to fill that need along with partnership with other organizations. So kind of that's where we're at in a nutshell.
Yeah, great. Let's see. Let's go to Maya. You want to talk just a little bit, and again, maybe 2 minutes or so, as we're getting to our closing minutes here. I want to give, I want to turn the corner at the end to sort of thinking about, you know, what this, there's a lot of reimagining happening, and just think a little bit about, you know, how we can reimagine reopening as we move forward. But before we do that, let's see, Maya, do you want to talk just a little bit about how the Sounders and Rave Foundation have pivoted and are thinking about accessibility right now?
Yeah, I would say we haven't pivoted. I think, you know, one of the moments that we were all faced with when COVID hit is that the places in the communities that Cheryl's working in, that Bookie's working in, that we're trying to invest in, are the same communities that have historically, and from a generational after generational perspective, been the first communities where philanthropy and those things have said, oh, just wait, we're coming, but just wait. And now is not the time to sit back and wait. It's actually time to lean in more and make sure the SHIT gets done in this moment when it doesn't ever. And so that's sort of how we've approached this. And at the start of the year, we had ambitious fundraising goals to be able to put 7 mini pitches on the ground in 2020. When COVID hit, we were like, uh-oh, what do we do? And I can tell you that we've been able, because school districts aren't in session, we'll open 4 of those original 7 by the end of this year. And we pushed to do that, but that was an intentional sort of step to sort of say, this is like, that's the old posture. Like, this is not okay. Equity doesn't serve itself. And if you keep saying no, no, no to the same communities who are used to hearing no, 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 just wait, just wait, just wait, that's part of the problem. So no, we're not going to be that organization. And that's a hard thing. I'm going to tell you, it's not easy to do that. But we were able to get 4 done, or we'll be able to get 4 done this year. I think that's important because you start talking about Warren saying, and like, there's a reopening coming, right? And there are also places where, like, look, I go play with my daughters in parks in Normandy Park and Berrien and White Center that aren't closed entirely yet, where we can socially distance and like recreate a little bit. So there are safe places to do that in small groups is actually okay right now. So we should be doubling down on that. And then the other thing I would say is, not dissimilar to what Bookie said, is the opportunity now is to do that gap analysis, to figure out where you're not serving. And we've discovered that just like Cheryl's saying, in a Zoom land where everyone is getting more comfortable with the technology, that's now a piece of learning and infrastructure that allows us to be more accessible in the future, right? We've been limited by our abilities to serve kids because we are so geographically, like, we gotta run programs where we are. Well, no, we don't. And some of our programs inside Rave really lend themselves to the environment. So we do a goals for art program. Art and soccer go together hand in hand. We were able to do, so kids get to design the goals that we actually install on field. So we do art with them, and then that art is what fabricates the goals. We were able to execute that in partnership with Des Moines Midway Elementary School this spring, as they were looking for more social emotional stuff to do with their 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders at the end of a school year that was disrupted. Well, we did an art class, and we were able to utilize one of our players who's really artistic to do that. And now we've got this great model of how we can deploy in a virtual environment that is replicable beyond COVID. And so we're
Cool.
starting to think about how that learning and those gaps can be filled. And the
Right.
easy one for us is our STEM program, our early learning pre-K physical literacy program, making sure those are translated into Spanish, like taking the time to do that right now, so that we're ready to deploy on a wider scale when we get on the other side
Great.
of it.
Great. Great. Yeah, excellent. So we've got 7 minutes left. Julie, I'm gonna have you start here, but and then maybe 2 minutes or so, and then I'm gonna open it up to panelists to just think about how we do this reimagining, and again, I wish we had more time to do this. So just one bullet about that till we're at time here. But Julie, I think specifically, one thing that hasn't quite come up yet, but that is an expertise of yours and something that the center does really well is training and thinking about coaching and instructors. And so if you could, again, just spend no more than 2 minutes just talking about how you envision, how do we get coaches and instructors ready for this? What is reopening? What do we need our coaches to know for reopening, and solve the problem in 2 minutes? That'd be great.
Sure, and I'm actually going to even zoom out first and then come back to
Perfect.
that. But I talk really fast, as you've all probably noted. But first of all, I just want to be super clear that all of the data we saw at the beginning is no longer true, because rates of physical activity for youth are much lower. We probably know that from our own kids and what's going on, and the gaps are wider. Like, absolutely, they're wider now. And so if we don't take some of these equity pieces into consideration, we're going to come back to a landscape that's worse than the landscape that we were trying to change that got a D. Like, we're definitely going to be at an F. So I just, I feel that so much that it's already happening. We're already moving back to a landscape that is more inequitable, like just in terms of who has like a backyard, who has access to like a personal trainer or Peloton, or, plenty of devices in their houses to get on these virtual programs that folks are offering. So I really want to encourage folks to think about this idea of reopening solutions centering those who have traditionally been furthest from access. So instead of those pay to play folks being the first ones to knock on the door and take the field space that's available, because there's less of it available now because we have to socially distance the kids to be on it. Like, as Warren was saying, let's make sure that it's going to the folks who live in that community so the kids can get on it for free play. And then the same thing is true for coaches. Like, I just see on Twitter sometimes these things that make me crazy, where coaches are like, I can't wait to find out who's been really working hard, during COVID and using this downtime to grind and get stronger and better. And I'm just thinking, no, not everybody's had that opportunity, right? Like, you really need, as a coach, to think who has that backyard and who's been home watching their siblings in an apartment without access to anything. And so just as we want to do that programmatically, I just would say coaches need to do the same thing, which is ease into it, have a slow on-ramp, understand more about what was going on for those kids. Every kid that comes back has experienced some kind of trauma, and some more than others. And so we just need to be slow and cautious and careful and pay close attention to every kid, so that we can serve them as they need it. And physical activity is going to be a great way to address that trauma if we can do it well. So.
Cool. We've got time for one more panelist. So if anybody has a hot 90 seconds just about thinking how they're thinking about reopening, I'll open the floor.
Yeah, I'll say this, be quick. I think it goes beyond just the temperature checks when you're doing. I think Julie said it best, right? That it's about checking these kids' vitals, right? And making sure that we understand their spiritual, physical, emotional, and social needs, right? That's coming into this. And not just about play. I think we have to now reimagine what that looks like as they start to come into the fields and courts and classrooms, that it goes well beyond just your physical ability, right? We want to make sure that you're well. We call it checking your vitals, right? We want to check your vitals on a day-to-day basis, right? And how are you doing as a whole? And how's your parents doing? Because again, this work extends far beyond just what we're capable of doing, and we want to achieve the unachievable. We have to also make sure we care for those that need to be cared for.
I think this idea of checking vitals is a great way to close. I think if there's one thing that we can reimagine, it's reorienting the sports world around what it means to check in with kids, and how sports really can be what kids need in their moments of greatest strife, in their moments of greatest trauma, and how sports and physical activity and free play can be used to heal. And we really haven't needed that more than we do right now. So I just want to really appreciate all the panelists' time, all of your work that you're doing, just day in and day out as the world changes. And I guess I'll close by saying the King County Play Equity Coalition is constantly working to try and help these folks and other folks who are awesome do their work, and act and get and impact more kids, and make sure that those gaps that Julie just spoke about, we can address them as best we can. So here's how to get in touch with us. If you want to get involved, we'd love to hear from you. If you have questions or want to get in contact with anybody who spoke today, you can email that email address, and we'll be sure to make connections. We think one of the coalition's greatest powers is truly as a matchmaker and a coalition builder. So we want to help y'all do that if you're into it. And with that, we'll close. Look at that, with time to spare. Nailed it. So again, panelists, thanks so much for your time. Thanks everybody for being here. Stay safe, stay healthy, take walks, get some fresh air, and thanks for spending your afternoon with us. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Great job, Adrian.
Thanks.